Warning, this video contains spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home. You have been warned. Great Spider-Man stories and misery go hand in hand. While Peter Parker's superhero alias is beloved by many people for his superheroics, cool power set, high intelligence, and teenage antics, Spider-Man's best stories have one or two components in common. One is that the conflict is generally in some way his fault, and the second is tragedy. Whether we are talking about how in the first Raimi Spider-Man film where Peter allows a robber to run away from a crime scene, a move that inevitably leads to the death of Peter's beloved Uncle Ben a few minutes later, how in Raimi's Spider-Man 2, Peter grapples with his own selfish desires, where he wants to abandon his responsibility as Spider-Man in favor of focusing on his own personal life, or in how Peter Parker just wants to go on vacation from this whole superhero business in Spider-Man Far From Home. Many of the conflicts in these films stem from Peter's younger selfish tendencies, where he focuses on himself and his own personal wants and desires, rather than the overall societal good, which makes him a very conflicted figure in this regard. Spider-Man No Way Home gets this core aspect of Peter's character incredibly right. In fact, the recently released Spider-Man adventure accurately portrays Peter Parker's selfish desires, mistake-prone teenage nature, and the fact that he is a tragic figure. While the movie is filled with fan service and is a lot of fun in terms of its multiversal concept that brings back a bunch of villains from older Spider-Man movies like the Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, Sandman, Electro, and the Lizard, and even brings back those movies' various Spider-Man in Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield as if it were a Spider-Man reunion or a convention, Spider-Man No Way Home is notable in the sense that it thematically hits the audience hard, that despite its fun aspects, the events of the film get blunt, cutthroat, and serious, especially in the third act. This is especially true in how Peter is responsible for Spider-Man No Way Home's conflict. That he both flubbed up Doctor Strange's spell that would have caused the whole world to forget that he was Spider-Man, and that his whole reason to make everyone forget that he was Spider-Man in the first place was so he and his friends MJ and Ned could get into college. How juvenile. And this flubbing on epic proportions caused Spider-Man villains from other dimensions to invade MCU Peter Parker's world and wreak havoc on New York City, which once again is in some way Peter's fault, meaning that every person hurt and all the property damaged is on him. Just like how global warming is the fault of mega corporations and governments too chicken shit or corrupt to regulate them. Because America. Admittedly, I said as much in my review, though sans the global warming part. I mentioned that Peter is in some part responsible for the mayhem caused by the villains invading the MCU due to a spell that Peter botched, but what I didn't say was the specifics, the spoiler-filled details as to what the ramifications are. So allow me to correct this right now. See, when the villains emerge in Spider-Man No Way Home, Peter learns that they all died fighting their universe's version of Spider-Man, and due to this, Marvel Cinematic Universe Peter Parker wants to treat the various mental illnesses of these villains in order to save them from their terrible fate. Much like how I wish someone could save me from the terrible fate of playing Anthem. But as with all of Peter Parker's choices, his decisions have consequences. Whether we are discussing him deciding to cast a spell that affects the entire population of the universe so that he and his friends can get into a prestigious college, botching that said spell when he got cold feet, the resulting invading villain spreading chaos across New York City, or Peter's noble decision to help heal his enemies rather than just defeat them with brute force, Peter's choices eventually have dire ramifications. One, the Green Goblin murders Peter's beloved Aunt May, and secondly, at the end of the film, the only way to fix the impending collapse of reality itself is to mind-wipe everyone's knowledge about the existence of Peter Parker, including to the people he loved the most, like his girlfriend MJ, Ned, Doctor Strange, Happy Hogan, and probably J. Jonah Jameson's barber. In other words, the people that Peter cares about the most in the world don't remember that he exists by the end of the film. It is a brutal plot point, and one that, along with the death of Aunt May, that the movie does not compromise on. The movie ends with Peter in a sad place, which caused a bunch of kids in my theater to cry, because Spider-Man No Way Home is truly fun for the whole family. Peter Parker's tragedy befits Spider-Man No Way Home's nature as an epic Spider-Man story. As good and noble as Spider-Man is as a superhero, teenage Peter Parker can be very self-centered at times, and not use his power responsibly like he generally aspires to, and this ultimately leads to trouble, and in Spider-Man No Way Home, we see Peter's flawed nature really bite him in the ass like an excitable puppy trying to take on a dog 5 times its size, and with all the formidable villains trying to kill while him in reality itself being on the verge of collapse, Peter is in quite the predicament for sure, and it is ultimately his fault on some level. However, these plot developments in Spider-Man No Way Home also show off Peter's heroic worth. While Spider-Man screwed up the memory spell, which then resulted in dangerous villains from across the Spider-Man multiverse to attack MCU New York. God, MCU New York sounds like a Marvel-themed police procedural, to be honest. Peter does make some heroic decisions, like trying to heal his villains who would normally be fought and disposed of like the calls of debt collectors. And when it came to the death of his Aunt May at the hands of Willem the Goblin, Peter was able to put that loss behind him so that he could fight on and be the hero, and that's impressive. After all, he saw his mother figure die a bloody death via a pumpkin bomb. He was at his lowest point and needed to be consoled, because what human wouldn't need that in that situation? Hell, Peter's Aunt May was his voice of conscience. She said the great power and responsibility line, and thusly her murder is a huge loss for Peter. Yet even despite his tragic loss, Peter was able to be resilient and overcome his grief and be the hero that New York City and the world needed. He fought all the villains, saved them from their various illnesses, and sent them home to their respective universes, because he is a good person in spite of his flaws. Furthermore, Peter Parker makes hard choices that properly reflect his valorous nature. After all, Peter decides to let Doctor Strange cast the spell that causes the rest of the universe to forget that Peter exists in order to save the world. He makes that intense and painful personal sacrifice, one that will even cause him to be unrecognizable to his girlfriend MJ, and essentially nullify a year's worth of the good and healthy relationships that he built with so many of the people he loved, also that the world can be saved. He made the hard choice that put the well-being of others over his own personal wants. He ultimately uses his great power responsibly, just like how his Aunt May would have wanted. And that's honestly Peter Parker's character arc in Spider-Man No Way Home. Even though Peter is a flawed person, hell, we even see his imperfect nature when he has to be held back from murdering the Green Goblin, he finds his courageous spirit and acts morally in the right, even despite how burdensome it can be at times. Hell, his job as a superhero is far from easy, and due to the high-risk nature of his occupation, Peter must make impossible decisions where he must abandon his own personal desires, all in favor of helping others. And Spider-Man No Way Home sees Peter taking heavy losses and making painful sacrifices also that he can help others and even save lives, no matter how much it hurts him personally, proving that even despite some selfish tendencies, Peter Parker is noble. Such is the nature of Spider-Man. And with that, that was the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like rating, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment telling me what you think of Spider-Man No Way Home. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon page. $1 a month gets you into this credit sequence, and $5 a month will allow you to make review requests. Get on that. And speaking of Patreon, I just wanted to thank my patrons, especially my high tier ones in David, Samantha, Devlin, Mom, and Morgan. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all. If I could meet Doctor Strange, I'd ask him to cast a spell to make everyone forget that Metallica's Saint Anger exists. That album is trash.